What's up, Internet? You're tuning in episode 159 of Nintendo Noise, Split Screen Games' weekly Nintendo podcast. I'm your host, Pete and Bessie, joined today by my very good friend and co-host, Miss Sierra Plus Ultra.
Pete.
Welcome back, my friend. You've been out there rocking people's faces off, and it's good to have you back.
Yeah, I'm glad to be back. Been too long.
Yeah, I bet you're tired. I bet you're happy to be home and relaxing for a little bit.
Yeah, because I came home the door, and then I got E. coli. So that was... What is happening?
Banner year for you, you know? A lot of highs and lows.
All that matters, we're making up for lost time every time, just like we always do.
Absolutely. You're coming out swinging already, you know? I can tell it's going to be a good one.
Yeah.
Awesome. Well, you know, we have a fun one, I think, today, because this was a story that broke over on Twitter, and you and I both independently came across it, and we're very interested in it. There's a guy by the name of Kyle McLean, who goes by Farm Boy in Japan over on Twitter, and he posted a thread with some detailed notes on this exhibit that was an unannounced exhibit that got revealed at the Nintendo Museum, which they have. It's called Storage, which is very funny. And it's up on that second floor. And again, I guess if you didn't check out the episode where we broke down the entire Nintendo Museum, I'll have a link to that down below. Or I guess you could go click that little icon in the corner if you're on YouTube. And you can go check out that full breakdown if you missed that. But up on that second floor where they have like all the, you know, the real historical stuff, right? That's like where the main show floor is with all the giant controllers and all the games and all that stuff. And it's all dedicated to prototypes of Nintendo hardware. And, you know, we both thought it would be fun to kind of like break down Kyle's reporting and then try to discuss which of these ideas had been, like, would have been the most disastrous if they had actually made it to market in such a way. Because some of them are very normal and some of them are very wacky.
Wacky is an understatement, which we will get into shortly.
So I think, you know, we'll have a link down to Kyle's thread down below. He points out that, like, this is that floor where you're not allowed to take photos, so he doesn't have photographs of any of the prototypes, and until someone is brave enough to break those rules and risk Nintendo's lawyers coming after them, I think these kinds of detailed reports are going to be the best that those of us that can't make our way to Japan yet, hopefully, we'll have to go on. But he said that he literally gasped when I saw this exhibit and what was on display. It was filled with prototypes I had never seen nor heard of before. Sadly, no pictures were allowed, so I scribbled down some notes and drew approximations of what the prototypes looked like in using my phone. Here's everything I saw. So like I said... Oh, no, go ahead.
No, is it so bad that we're not allowed to take photos? Because look at what we got. You got to get creative. And took notes. Honestly, it's enough for me until I get down there.
Yeah, it is kind of fun. It does remind me a bit of, like, pre-internet video game fandom, right? Where it was like, you know, the ways that you got information were like magazines and rumors and, you know, like these very like controlled sources of information. And I feel like we're so spoiled by, you know, just like being used to having access to, you know, whatever we're interested in, that like having something like this and having to go off of someone's report with their little sketches and like God bless Kyle, right? Not an artist, right? Like just somebody who's drawn it down to be like try to visualize like this is what it looked like, you know. And I really got a kick out of his drawings. So make sure you go give him a click and check them out because they're very funny. And I think, you know, definitely we'll do our best to explain it, but I think also, you know, if you want that visual representation, Kyle went ahead and did that work for you. So I'm thinking let's just go through his list in, you know, chronological order of like how, you know, the prototypes were laid out, and then we can kind of, you know, rank them, I guess, as we see fit. So the first one was a prototype of the Super Famicom with red buttons, and I think this is one that I've seen this image before. He actually has images that are like just pulled from Google that weren't at the museum, but it's a thing that it's a very, very rare collector's item that somebody I think bought on aftermarket and then shared pictures of, right? So actually being able to see that in the flesh is still pretty cool, even if it's something that you may have seen before.
Yeah, sometimes pictures, it's completely different. It really is another experience to see it right in front of your eye.
And apparently this is the second prototype. I wasn't familiar with this. There's another one that Kyle called out that was the like older Super Famicom design that was like a more kind of like boxish design, and that they didn't have that one represented. So it's interesting that this seems to be pretty curated. It's like specifically things that like definitely came out, and it seems to be like kind of the last iteration of it before it came out in some cases, or in some of the other ones are like prototype designs that didn't quite make it to market, but I guess we're maybe in the running until like late in the design phase, because it's interesting what's represented and what's not. Because even in Kyle's thread, there's a bunch of people replying and being like, "Oh, like was this thing there? Was that?" And it's products that we've seen mentioned or that photos have been shared of, but like they've never really formally acknowledged, never talked about, never brought to market, obviously. So it's interesting to see what made it into this exhibit, because according to Kyle, they only put this together a few days prior to the opening of the museum. I don't know how he has that information, but that's what he said, which I thought was also interesting. They're like, "Oh, we got an extra corner over here. Let's throw a bunch of these prototypes over there."
Yeah, really. I forget like if there were some media people that were invited to Japan to specifically like make content about the museum's opening. I didn't catch if he was one of them, but I've seen people like I watched one video by somebody who went into detail about this second floor that cannot be photographed and like other exhibits they didn't televise in the direct.
Interesting. So maybe there was like some boilerplate information that they like supplied to press or whatever about, because obviously, when we initially reported on it, there was a ton of stuff on the website that they didn't even include in the direct. So
right.
I don't know if maybe they wanted there to be surprises when you got there, or if it was that it was literally just up to the last minute that they're curating this original collection, but very interesting.
Yeah. Yeah, right.
You hope that they'll add more stuff to it over time too, right? Like this, this specific exhibit, right? Like bring in more prototypes and more weird stuff to show off.
It would be a missed opportunity if they didn't, because like as we will get into like the following information, like you'll see that there's a lot, and like I'm sure that there's prototypes not even mentioned here that were maybe integral to like the GameCube's development process and other random stuff. Even like reading through this thread, like you kind of put two and two together and like realize how we got to the Switch like subsequently through all these different prototypes.
That's interesting. I hadn't thought about it that way.
Hardware. Yeah, it's
there's
really interesting.
Two devices here that definitely feel like precursors to what the Switch eventually became.
Yeah, aside from the abominations, it's really inspiring seeing flops from Nintendo.
That's the thing, right? Like, it's so like, as much as you love the W's, right? Like the losses are so much more interesting, right? Because it's they're such a like like you think of them as just this monolith, like infinitely successful company, right? But like, yeah, you forget about the Virtual Boys and all the other missteps along the way, right? Like,
oh yeah,
for every NES, there's a Virtual Boy. So the next one was something I had never heard before, and I can't believe I didn't know this. They had multiple prototypes of the Ultra 64 controller. So apparently, Ultra 64 was like the prototype name. Like they had planned on bringing it to market called the Ultra 64 at the time, and then I guess that the Nintendo 64 was like a last minute kind of pivot. So like Kyle said, I'm using the Ultra 64 name because for whatever reason, all of the prototypes had labels on them with Ultra 64 written on them. There wasn't a single Nintendo 64 logo to be seen on this corner. So I don't know. I guess maybe Kyle didn't know. Maybe this isn't a well-reported thing, but I went and looked it up. And yeah, this was the planned name for it as late as 1993. Nintendo had a working prototype of it that they were working on it with this company called Silicon Graphics, which I actually read about in Console Wars. They talk about that near the end of that book. And yeah, I guess apparently they like, you know, had a whole design figured out for it and everything. It's like you can see it's got this like you know, very like late 90s, early aughts, like edgelordy kind. It's like mono black, and the logo is like silver, and you know has like a very kind of like, it doesn't look very like kiddie, family friendly, right? Like it has a kind of like edgy teenager look to it, I feel like.
Yeah, it's like when we think about the N64, we think about the whimsy of the clear like color casing and stuff.
Yeah.
And like
even the logo, right? It's like the four, you know, like basic core colors or whatever, right? It's like it looks like, you know, like a kid's paint set or something, you know?
Yeah. Really hard to believe. I mean, like when I don't know why, but when I look at this, I think Xbox. It has nothing to do with Xbox.
But like it has that kind of aesthetic for sure, you know? Like it is that like early aughts, like Mario with a tribal tattoo, you know? Like it's that edgelordy kind of like vibe. It's very interesting.
I mean, it's never too late, Nintendo. If you want to slap some flames on a controller, I'll buy it.
This is like the kind of shit where I'm like, damn, I would love a shirt with this logo on it. Like that would be so funny, you know? It's like just like defunct like Nintendo logo designs. It's very interesting.
Yeah.
Oh, go ahead.
Yeah, and the controller with the single grip too is also insane.
Yeah, and he has like a mock-up that he did in Photoshop that's like it's exactly the N64 controller that you know, right? But then apparently the stick was like a shiny metal material, and it has just one, you know, like handle in the center rather than on the sides. It literally is just like, what if you erase the two other little handles, you know? Which is interesting because I guess it has like almost like a more traditional like joystick kind of design, you know? Like it's like almost like reminiscent of like an Atari controller or something, where it's just you have the one stick in the center and then your buttons on the side and your D-pad. And yeah, I don't know. I mean, like, it's interesting because I can't imagine how that would work and like be comfortable, because you'd have, you know, such a different like scheme, you know, like the one hand is like gripping the side of the controller like a standard controller, and then the other one, like, it makes sense why they added that. But it's like, do you know anybody that ever used, like, you never use that left grip, right? Like it's like your hand's always on the stick, and so it's like, I don't know. It's interesting. It's interesting. Like, did they add that just because they're like, all right, you need the grip on the side with the buttons, and it looks silly without the other grip, right? So we just made it that try, because it's very iconic, right? Like it is. It's a cool design. I get it, but it's like, did anybody ever use that side one? I don't think so. You know.
I know, but it's like, it's just weird if you don't have it to mirror the other one. I guess. I guess that was the logic.
For sure. But I did think this was one of the really interesting ones for sure. And he said, finally in the Ultra 64 section, they had what appeared to be the final clay mold of the completed design of the controller. I felt like I was in the presence of a wholly historical artifact. And I think that's just so cool. Like, I love that they have those type of things. Like, I've told the story dozens of times about when they like did the Mario Maker reveal, and like Shigeru Miyamoto was just like handling that piece of paper, like the grid paper where he designed World 1-1, and it's like, guys, you gotta put this stuff under glass, and it's like,
you gotta laminate it or something.
If you have the original like clay mold of the, it's like, yeah, let's put that under glass. Let's, you know, like, let's get this somewhere safe where people can enjoy it.
Yes, love that stuff.
So then there was a prototype GameCube that he had a photo of, like, one that had appeared online a couple years ago that was, like, actually had, like, the dolphin logo on it and is basically just, like, a very blue GameCube that kind of looks like a Dreamcast almost, you know? And he was saying that this is very similar looking to that, but rather it was like a greenish blue kind of color, slightly transparent, like you were talking about with like that N64 design that we're familiar with. And it showed that there were like no innards inside it. So I guess it was just the case. So maybe they were like experimenting with case designs or whatever. And he said that there was also a prototype GameCube controller that had like the kind of like button layout that we're familiar with already in place, but that the grips were longer, which I guess is interesting because I do think the GameCube ones are kind of a little short, right? They're like a little stubby. And then the left grip was made out of a clear plastic that had yellowed with age, which is
so interesting. Why are we singling out the left grip like that?
Yeah, it's like I wonder if the decision there was like to have that kind of like asymmetrical design that we know Nintendo is fond of, right? Like the whole, like that's the thing with the Joy-Cons, right? It's like one is one color, one's the other color, and they have a different layout, and you know, even though they're like supposed to be synonymous controllers. I wonder if maybe that was the thought there of like, do you want to have like one's crystal and then like the C stick is like that yellow rubber, so that like they have very distinct different feels, you know? So you don't have that like, maybe they were trying to differentiate from like the PlayStation controller or the Xbox controller with have like two identical sticks.
Right, the PS2 controller like similarly had like the stubby handles, the grips.
And like I wonder if maybe they thought like, oh, like is this like a young player friendly thing to be like, this stick looks very different than this one, rather than like, you know, if you're somebody that hasn't played video games, right, and you pick up a PlayStation controller, an Xbox controller for the first time, it's like you don't necessarily know which stick like moves forward or which one swings the camera or whatever. And it's like the idea of like, well, the C stick is yellow and that's the camera, but you know, it's like, right. I don't know, maybe that was what they were thinking, is like, do we need to communicate this to the player because we've never had a console that has two sticks before, you know?
Totally. Well,
it's interesting.
Yeah.
Particularly that like the layout was already pretty much there, you know?
Right.
So
in the end, we got that classic solid purple.
Yeah, and like to this, and I say this as someone that loves the GameCube controller, it's one of the funkier controller layouts. It's very like odd, you know, but like for whatever, if you like it, it just makes sense, you know.
I like it.
You know, do you use that for Smash?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. That's my controller. Yeah.
Yeah, that's mine too. I've tried to switch, but it just something about it is so like it feels like I'm relearning the game, you know?
I understand. And the buttons have a different amount of give than the Pro controller.
Yeah.
I like the response from the left and right buttons. So I don't know, it works for me.
Yeah. Yeah, I still have like my original GameCube controller that I've played every Smash with the same GameCube controller. It's like, I don't know, you know, it's like I feel like it's like I'm attached to it, you know? It's like I'm like a cowboy with it's like my old ass gun, you know? I'm like, no, this is the good one.
Right.
It's worn in the way I like it.
Yeah.
So this next one I think was the one that you and I think both thought was probably the most interesting, right? Was the prototype Wiimotes that are just wild. Kyle said the prototype Wiimotes on display were fascinating. These prototypes have been previously shown. These prototypes that have been previously shown were all on display, as well as ones I'd never seen. One prototype was shaped exactly like a fidget spinner with a D-pad and buttons. Another looked like a giant D-pad with buttons all over it. And this was one of the ones that he drew, which is incredible. Yeah, there was the Yeah, one that was like he thought was a prototype for the classic controller, where you have like a dock and you plug the Wiimote into it, and then it like becomes a controller. Sorry, was that too dramatic?
No, that motion. It's so funny. I'm just like imagining a reverse Excalibur, just like back into the dock.
Now you're playing with power.
Oh, these are so crazy, P. I mean, the pictured ones are goofy as is. I mean, one of them just looks like a universal TV remote.
Yeah.
And that's like, that's hilarious in its own little way.
That little like center button, it's like very like, yeah, guys, this literally looks like a Samsung TV remote. It's ridiculous.
Yes, please record this episode of Real Housewives. Like, but oh my god.
I do like the look of that little guy. It's like the photo that he attached that's not his drawing, right? Where it's got the single like joystick with the 3 buttons and then the 2 guys up top. Like that's like a pretty nice little, like I can see that for
the black one.
Yeah, that one that's on the top right.
That's an interesting one.
I could definitely see that for for like the virtual console, right? And like wanting to take advantage of like playing those old school games, right? Like that could definitely very easily translate to a NES or a Super NES game or something like that.
Right. I mean, technically it could have worked. It has that wand. It functions as a wand, it seems, or could.
It also very much, now that I'm looking at it, it reminds me of the Joy-Con now, right? Like a single Joy-Con kind of looks like that.
Yeah, put that button on the side,
right?
On the top, yeah.
Yeah, and like even like having like the joystick on the, like it's like both of them are like there's a joystick and offset buttons, like that's
right,
and it does kind of look like that. It's interesting to see how like some of these, like you made the point about how some of these ideas like seem to come back later, like for the Switch, and it's interesting to see like even with stuff like that, right? Like the Wiimote that they designed in like 2006. It's like, oh yeah, like you can kind of see the through line between that and the Switch 10 years later,
Yeah, it's crazy.
Really cool. And like this is the stuff I'm like so excited about to like get to the museum is like, I find this kind of stuff so fascinating. And like they're so tight-lipped about this kind of stuff. Like they never talk about the failures and the like they're happy to beat their chest about the victories, but it's like this kind of stuff is like, yeah, it's interesting. It's interesting to see how R&D like comes together, and like how many people like were playing with that funky ass controller and before they were like, this sucks. Like this
does not work.
This doesn't feel right. It's like and I love that. I love that the idea that was their job that day. It's like, all right, like let's play Super Mario Brothers with this for 10 weeks and see if it sucks.
I can't imagine that with the drawn controllers. These like especially the fidget spinner and the giant D-pad. These are abominations.
Yeah, I mean that fidget spinner one is real funky.
How do you? So what? Like if I needed the buttons on top, I gotta play like this? Like that's crazy.
I'm wondering if it was like because like so to try and expand on this, right? Because it looks like a D-pad, right? In that like it. I guess it looks like an X, right? Like made of Wiimotes, and on 2 of them there's D-pads, and then on 2 of them there's buttons, and like, yeah, I'm like, is the thought there that you're gonna rotate the controller, and like for like some games you're gonna hold it this way, and some you'll hold it that way, and
I didn't think of that. Yeah,
rotate it. But even so, to your point, it's like, how does that make sense? Because it's like there's 2 buttons on each stick, so it's like even if you turn it, you never have access to more buttons. You always have a D-pad and 2 buttons. It's like, how is that better, like what functionality does that add, and I'm so interested because it's like for something like the fidget spinner is also a weird one, but like the docked Wiimote, I'm like, I can see how that as an idea makes sense, right? That it's like it has the connector that you plug, the nunchuck into anyway. So they knew that they were gonna like be plugging things into the Wiimote. So it's like rather than have a whole other controller you gotta buy, you'll just plug this attachment into it. It's like, I can understand the logic behind that, but I'm like, I would love to get to pick the brain of the person that was like, what if it was a cross? And it's like, how do you envision that? Like, what is the game that uses that? And how does that make sense? And maybe it didn't, and that's why it never happened, and it was just like, this is a cool design, but like, yeah, I'm so fascinated by like the thought process there, you know?
Me too. They're like, listen, I'm not a game developer, hardware developer. I'm not saying all my ideas would be like, home runs. I would never suggest something like that.
I have that thought a lot, right? Where I'm like, I'm not that person. Fair enough. I'm not sitting here saying that I know what the right call is, but I feel like there are things like this where I'm like, yeah, like, it's like,
I know.
And seemingly this is the same person, right? Or the same team that eventually came to the right design. So it's like clearly talented, but it's like, yeah, there are decisions like that where you're like, who pitched this? What was the thought there? Right?
I know.
It's like, it's so funky, but hey, I can't wait to see this thing. I'll tell you what. Like,
I know.
Just trying to envision it. I'm just like, is it literally just like two Wiimotes like stuck together? Because I can't help but imagine that's what it looks like.
I just like imagine like you're visiting the Nintendo Museum as a former employee. You get to that floor. You're looking at your old prototype that got shelved, and it's like, it brings back happy memories of working at Nintendo. But then someone starts like pointing and laughing at
like, what the hell is that thing? I love it. All right, so this next one is one I've seen before, but I had forgotten about it. So this was the, as Kyle put it, the infamous Wii U gamepad prototype, which is essentially, frankly, it looks like a baby monitor, right? Like, it's got that real chunky, like, beige plastic with a really, like, dim screen, and it's got the two joysticks that are like, connected to what looks like a tiny motherboard or something like that, right? It's a tiny little receiver, and then they have wires running through those two Wiimotes that are colored. They're white, but like one has blue D-pad and one has a pink D-pad, and reminiscent of the Joy-Cons, right? And then those are like bolted on the side of this thing. And what I thought was interesting was that he pointed out what doesn't come across in the photos is how many cables were attached to the unit. And it's so funny for me to think about, like, how common a thing that must be during like the early prototypes where you're literally just like fusing random pieces of technology together and just being like, this is how, and trying to like get a rough proof of concept. And it's just so funny, like, what an abomination this thing looks like. What a like Frankenstein's monster of like random Nintendo parts shoved together.
I know. You really hit the nail on the head with the baby monitor thing. Like, it looks like a medical instrument that like some guy glued Joy-Cons onto, or Wiimotes.
Like, it looks like one of those like YouTube videos of like, can you play Doom on a calculator? It's like someone like it's like, yeah, I hacked a baby monitor to play Doom. I connected two Wiimotes to it.
Holy shit.
It's like I took my grandpa's like heart monitor and I'm playing Nintendo games on it.
Did I just invent the new emulation hardware?
Oh, so the next one was they had a prototype Virtual Boy that was clear plastic, and then they had controllers for it that were made out of styrofoam, which I thought was interesting, and they had buttons and cables like attached to them. So again, like never would have thought that styrofoam was an early part of the design process for a console, but there you go.
What would the headset be for? Like,
so this was the one where they had the their VR device from the 90s, and it was like not really a headset that you put on. It had like a tripod, kind of like that. It would like, you'd sit it on a desk and you'd like stick your eye up to it to see.
I see. Okay.
So I guess, yeah, I mean, I guess it's technically a headset, right? I mean, maybe they didn't have that design worked out yet, though. Maybe he, like, literally it means like it had like a strap on it or something originally, but
right.
Yeah, the Virtual Boy's so wild. Like, it's so weird that VR was like, it like still doesn't really work, and in the 90s we're ready for VR.
I know.
It's absolutely wild. If you've never looked at the games for it too, like, just look at some footage. There, like, I got to play one at MagFest like years ago, and it's so weird. Like, all the graphics are just red. It's like just red. It's like everything looks so like it very much looks like the way that movies in like the late 80s and early 90s would like depict the internet, you know, like it has that, like, it's such a weird like time capsule design. It's funky, really funky.
Right.
That's one of the dumbest things I would love to own one day. I would love to own a Virtual Boy for sure.
Yeah.
So next up, this is the one I was most excited about, prototype Game Boys. And Kyle said, prototype Game Boys, I gasped. The earliest model was black with red buttons, and the layout was similar to the original Game Boy. And while the final Game Boy release has the phrase dot matrix with stereo sound, this prototype has the phrase dot matrix game above the screen, which is interesting. And then the other, seemingly further along in development, Game Boy prototype was now in the vertical layout that we all know. But it was an all-black unit with red buttons. Also, the phrase Game Boy are protected widely by patents was under the screen, which is so funny. And this, I think he meant to attach his drawing there from the previous tweet to this one, because he's talking about like the, you know, the or no, I guess that is what he's saying, the horizontal design.
He's saying the earliest model was similar to the original Game Boy Advance.
Yeah. Oh, there you go. Thank you. Yeah, okay. So that does make sense. So yeah, I thought that's interesting because it's like, I'm wondering if it essentially was like the same design as like a Game & Watch. You know, like,
that's what it looks like to me in the drawing.
Right?
Yeah.
Like 2 buttons on the one side, D-pad on the other side, screen in the center.
Yeah.
Seems like that familiar design. I wonder what made them change their mind on that one. Because it's like, you know, obviously we grew up on the original Game Boy, or the Game Boy Color. And like, it was fine when I was a kid, but as an adult, it's definitely tough to kind of hold in your hands, you know? Like,
yeah,
it's not like built in a way where you can really hold it in one hand. So it's like you do kind of have that, like, you know, old school, like, you know, I don't know. Like, it works, but, like, your hands are a little cramped as an older person. And it's interesting.
Exactly.
I mean, maybe that was just the thought, right? Was like, hey, like, you know, like, it's for children, so that's the thought. But I remember that, like, wanting to market to, like, people that were riding the train, right? Was, like, part of the, like, that was, like, Tetris was the biggest thing on it, and adults were playing that.
Right.
So it's kind of interesting that they ended up going for that design instead.
And they went horizontal anyway with the Advance, so
yeah, right. So like they ended up going back that, and then that's like every game, you know, the original Game Boy, right, is the only game console that's ever had that
vertical.
Yeah. It's funky.
I don't know.
You know, to be able to ask these questions, you know, it's like I would love to know.
Saying.
You know, like what was the thing? What was the thing that made them decide, like, oh, like, could they get a bigger screen on it that way or something like that? Like, who knows, you know?
That was my thought. Like, oh, maybe they went vertical because the bigger screen. I was like, hold on. And then they went back. So what did they, what was missing before the Game Boy that they figured out by the Advance?
Yeah, I don't know. It's interesting because it's like, I guess it does optimize the space somewhat, but yeah, I don't know. kind of interesting. So then there was a Game Boy Advance prototype, but it was funny because it's like it basically just looked like what the Game Boy Advance looked like. So it's kind of, again, right, it does kind of seem like maybe that original design was something that they just kind of like continued to play with, and then they went back to it, you know?
Yeah.
But there was a GBA Micro prototype that Kyle said was the most interesting one, that was designed to be used with just one hand, which I thought was interesting. And the little, you know, mock-up that he did is back in that original horizontal layout. But it kind of reminds me of the those, what were they, the Pokemon Plus? You remember those that were like the little like odometers that had Pikachu inside, and they had like 2 or 3 little games on them.
Yeah.
It kind of looks like that, you know?
A little Tamagotchi.
Yeah. Like it kind of looks like it's like mimicking that design, right? Of like the really tiny, like you can get it in one hand and play like very simple one-handed games with it.
Yeah.
Because like cell phone games were like a new thing, right? Like probably around this time, like everybody had like their first phone with a screen, and you had like Snake on it or whatever, you know?
Yeah.
So I wonder if maybe that was what they were thinking, was like they wanted to, get ahead of that. Interesting.
Perhaps. Yeah.
And then the last one, which is the one that you were talking about earlier, is they had a prototype of the DS where rather than it being like opening vertically, right, like we know, and having that clamshell design with the screen on the top and the screen on the bottom, it would open horizontally, and the 2 screens would essentially make one screen, right? And you would like open it like, like a switch, basically, that folded in half.
Yeah.
Which is crazy.
I know. And like people like now like have phones that do this.
Yeah, like now
and
foldable
like,
screens are literally a thing. Like you could do something like this now.
So like I mean, even now I can't really speak towards the efficiency of having screens that fold or a design like this, but like I don't know, Nintendo was thinking about it. So
it would be an interesting thing to see them do that at some point, because it's like, I doubt that we're at a point where my understanding of that technology is it's just like very expensive,
Yeah.
So like we're probably a long ways away from that being like super viable, but it would be nice to have the option to like fold your Switch in half and put it in your pocket. Like we've had plenty of folks in our Discord talk about how, they kind of missed the days when handhelds were handheld, and that like,
really,
screen real estate has kind of become the name of the game.
I know,
which I appreciate, but like it does make it when it's like, if I'm traveling and I want to just like toss a game console in my bag, my smallest option is still pretty large.
I know, we're on the up. We're increasing in size again.
Yeah, right. It's like the Switch 2 is going to even be bigger, probably. Right. That's what the word on the street is anyway. And like that happened with phones, right? Like, think about how big smartphones are now, right? Like it's like my smartphone is huge, and it's like I did that to myself.
No, I know, and like, but it's also kind of like, if you, I don't know, say that you've just been like a devoted Apple user your whole life, you're kind of forced into continuously getting the newest thing. Right. Otherwise, your device breaks or becomes inefficient. So, like, I feel like we're being dragged along on this biggest screen ever competition, like against our will. When there could be a middle ground here, I feel like.
Yeah, like I've. And I have a Switch, I have a Steam Deck, like I have more than enough devices to play games on, but like I have thought about busting out my Vita again and hacking it so that I could just have something that's smaller, like if I just want to play, something that like, is going to be like, like if I'm like going on a trip, right, for example, and it's like I don't necessarily think I'm going to have a lot of dedicated time to play some big game, but it's like I might have a few minutes where my hands are bored and I want to like play some Shovel Knight or boot up an emulator or whatever, right? And it's like just, have something to futz with. And it would be nice to have that option, and it would be interesting to see them maybe revisit this at some point, and maybe like for a Switch 3 or something like that, right? Like have the option for you to kind of like fold it in half and make it, have a smaller footprint.
It would be nice because I used to have a fanny pack that was like just big enough to like hold my Switch, but with no case. So
you're living that no case life.
So I mean, I would love to see them go back to like a much more portable device, pocket sized, for fun.
It'd be nice to have the option, for something like that. Because even the Switch Mini it's like the Lite is it's smaller, but it's not so small you could throw it in your pocket, like or get like a fanny pack or something like that. It's like it's a little big, whereas like the form factor of something like the PlayStation Vita, right, is like a good size screen, but it's it's very easy to slide it in a pocket, right? Like I used to carry mine around with me when I was playing something on it,
Nice.
Whereas like when I used to carry my Switch around with me, it's like I would literally just like have it on my hand like it's like a clutch, and it's like I'm just like walking around with a purse, and it's like if you already have a bag every day, right? It's like, oh man, like there's not a convenient way to. That's part of why I became a backpack guy. Was like I wanted to have a way to carry my Switch around. So I'm like, I guess I'll have a backpack.
Exactly, I know. For this one large device, and then everything else in comparison is just like whatever.
Yeah, it would be interesting to see them experiment with that again. And I guess if we've learned anything from looking at these designs is that they tend to not forget ideas even if they don't pan out, right? Like you can kind of see them, recycling some of these ideas, like when the time was right, like when the technology caught up with it, So maybe this is something we'll see someday.
Yeah.
All right, so we're going to play a little game here in a minute where we're going to try to figure out which of these is the worst case scenario if they made it to market. But before we do that, let me remind you that this episode of Nintendo Noise is brought to you by our Patreon producers for the month of October. They are, of course, Arnold J. Rimmer, Christopher Valenz, Steve Stumpy, Susan Likes Cats and Also Boobies, Ty the Dude, Voodoo Vic, and Waka Hula. Thank you all so much for your support over on patreon.com/flipscreengames. Y'all the reals to the real, and we greatly appreciate your support of this and all of our sister shows. If you want to go check out those shows, the Flip Screen Games podcast or the Steam Deck podcast, where we talk about what's going on in the world of console gaming outside of Nintendo and handheld gaming outside of Nintendo, as well as PC stuff over there, go check that stuff out. If you enjoy this show, you'll enjoy those shows too. I guarantee it. As Max put it when I said this the other day, that is the Flip Screen Game seal of approval. So, go check that out. It's all heavily vetted content. Flipscreen.games. That's the website. Go over there, click on the stuff. Thank you very much. Let's get back to it. Like, obviously, all these designs, I guess with some exception, were iterated on or abandoned for, like, one reason or another. But, like, what if they were the final designs? How many of these would be, like, catastrophic, I guess is the question, right? Because some of them, might have been okay, but so where do you want to start? Do you want to start with the ones that are the worst, or do we just get the ones that are not bad out of the way?
Maybe the ones that are not bad. Start there.
So, I think the one that for me is the easiest, like, wave ahead is just the Super Famicom with different colored buttons. It's like, great, that's fine, right? Like,
I completely agree there. No, because it's just slightly different. Like, otherwise, it's like the final product. Yeah,
and I think like when it comes down to, a color scheme or whatever, not to say that it doesn't matter, but I think it's one of those things that, like, if the hardware is good, people will like whatever it looks like, right? Like the Super Nintendo's color scheme in the States is very boring, but like it became iconic because you like the Super Nintendo,
Right.
Okay. I feel like the other one that feels like the least damning for me is the Ultra 64. Like, I definitely think that for all the reasons that we talked about, and like you said, right, it like feels like Xboxy. It was not the right choice for branding, but like not something that I think would have like materially made the console like worse or whatever, right? Like,
No, for sure. It's just it looks like third party hardware. That's its biggest crux.
yeah, it just doesn't have that Nintendo feel to it. Like, it doesn't have that like whimsical kind of their vibe is not edgy or sleek, right? Or slick.
Yeah.
It's like it's fun, it's casual, it's, supposed to be whimsical, and I think the pivot away from this was the right call. But in the alternate universe where this comes out, I'm pretty sure that like we're here talking about the N64 just as much, and we just call it the U64, and it's like
yeah,
it's a real 2000 design.
Yeah.
All right, what do you think's the next?
I mean, the prototype GameCube really wasn't like offensive or anything.
No,
either.
It wasn't a cube as much though, right? It did feel like a little more like I said, it kind of looked like the Dreamcast. It looked a little bit more just like square. So it's like, I don't think it would be as iconic a design. That's for sure.
God, no.
But like, not a deal breaker.
Yeah, that's what I was thinking.
I wouldn't mind if it was teal too. I mean, that like era where everything was purple. It's like, don't get me wrong, great color, but I love teal.
Yeah, teal's a great color.
Teal died off after the 90s. I mean, like, bring it back.
I know. Bring back teal. Bring back transparent stuff.
Yes, please. Oh, I guess on the same breath, the GBA prototype would also be fine.
Yeah.
Like, that's literally just like, okay, it sounds like it was the same, right? So I'm not.
Yeah, exactly.
Whatever. So the other one that I want to go to bat for is, I think, the Micro. That was like designed to be used one-handed. I think that's the product here that makes the most sense. That like, it's like, if that had come out, it could have been a cool thing on its own. And the fact that it didn't feels like, oh, like maybe that was a missed opportunity, right? Because they did eventually make a Game Boy Advance Micro, but I don't know how. It's kind of the same thing, right? Like, it's like, this I think could have had more of its own identity, which is at least cool,
Right. I really like. Maybe it just needed more time to incubate, but like, if it went to market even as is, like, I don't think it was the worst idea. I think they were thinking in the right direction.
Yeah.
With that,
I think there was something there for sure. So okay. So then I think probably the prototype Game Boy to me feels like the one that makes the most sense next.
Yeah, I think we're on the same page for a lot of this so far. Like, I agree. Like, the prototype Game Boys, it's just like, okay, this doesn't work. Like, and there's a reason why the final product landed where it did, I think.
I guess the only thing I could say there is, like, that might be one that, like, if they had figured it out, that might have been better. Like, it might have been better if it had that vertical layout, because obviously we've kind of gravitated towards that over time for a reason. But
they got there anyway.
And in the same breath, it's like the Game Boy has a more iconic design because it's the only one that looks like that,
Right.
So
right.
There's something to be said for that, for sure. Okay. So now we get into the funky stuff. I guess let's just say the Virtual Boy. We'll say that could be next, because it's like, I feel like the Virtual Boy was already a failure. So the idea that, it's like, okay, whatever. Like, that was a misstep no matter what. I think that one was never going to be a success, so that's fine.
Right.
I don't think it was the fact that it was red that made it not popular, right?
Yeah, I don't think that's the only reason, guys.
It would have been better if it had styrofoam controllers. That's the main.
I want to see it.
So
gotta see it.
Okay, so I guess the one that I'm the most like, I feel like the Wiimotes are so funky, and I'm very torn between like the Wiimotes or the DS thing, because it's like, if the DS was the two screens that opened horizontally, it would have basically just been a totally different console. Like, it wouldn't have been about the whole like two screen, one's a touch, one, like it would have just had a different identity. And like, it's hard to say that would have been good or bad, because it's like the DS was such a massive success. So it's like, but so was the Switch. So it's like, would that, who knows? It's kind of hard to say. Whereas like the Wiimotes, I feel like seems worse because the Wiimote design was, I think, very key to the Wii having its moment, and like,
Right.
not to say that the DS's wasn't, but I think it could have been successful as a different thing. Whereas if the Wiimote just had a bad or if the Wii just had a bad controller, I feel like the whole motion control thing just wouldn't have worked, right?
No, I completely agree. So are you saying like are we kind of looking at these last three, and are you kind of kind of like saying your ranking is like Wii U pad, then DS, then Wiimotes is the worst, or is that a different order?
I feel like the Wii U prototype has to be the worst because it's so like, if that's what it was, then it's like obvious, like that would have been insane, right? If it was just the baby monitor with two Wiimotes stuck on the side of it, forget the wires, right? Like pretend it worked, right? But if that's just what it looked like,
the wires, I didn't think of that. Okay,
that would have been obviously a nightmare, right? Like, so I think that to me is definitely the worst one. Where I'm kind of in between these two is, I guess what I'm saying is like, do you think the Wiimote or the Wii, I'm sorry, with a worse Wiimote is more damaging than if the DS was basically a totally different console? It feels like a huge gamble to say that, right? But like,
yeah,
the Wii was such a revolution, right? That like, I can't imagine it being successful with a different controller, or that level of successful, right? Like it looking like a TV remote, I think was a big part of it being able to like, evangelize itself to like old people and stuff,
Right.
Your grandma playing Wii bowling.
Yeah.
She's not doing that if it looks like a cross.
Oh no. That is blasphemous.
Yeah, exactly. That was actually the testing. They're like, it actually feels fine to play with, but we're worried about how Christians are going to react to it.
That was the only barrier? Like, really? Imagine. Well, I guess, to me, the DS prototype is less egregious than the Wiimotes.
Yeah.
And I'll explain this in a second. How I would do my ranking of the last three is like, DS prototype third, Wii U gamepad second worst, Wiimotes number one the worst.
Okay, love that.
The reason why, okay, so the DS prototype, I'm looking at it less like, oh, but like retroactively, that would have like, the DS wouldn't have been like what it was. I'm kind of more looking at it like, well, no, this is terrible, but we do have this now, in some way, shape, or form that people are fucking choosing to buy. So it's not something I love, but in terms of the last three, ranking them, I think it's the third worst because it's kind of something that
there's a version of it that could work.
Yes.
Yeah.
I don't love it and I wouldn't buy it, but just in contrast to everything here,
yeah,
that's my number three. The Wii U game, it's so ugly. It's so ugly. I might flip flop between the Wii U gamepad and the Wiimotes because I see your argument.
But when you made your point, it kind of made me rethink it for a second though, and I'm almost inclined to agree with you that the Wiimotes is worse because if the Wii U, even if it came out and it was anything like that, it would have been a problem. But the best version of the Wii U was still a failure.
Right.
So it's it's way less of a risk, right? It's oh, okay, so it would be even it would be their least successful console by a few million more units. Oh no,
yeah, no.
Right?
Yeah.
Whereas if the Wiimote gets messed up, it's that's literally the best selling console they've ever had.
That's the core of the concept.
Yeah, it's oof, I don't know.
I mean, don't get me wrong. A console that needs 1 million wires and is literally just a high school science project is a nightmare. It looks ugly. It makes no sense. Why are the control sticks on they're, I don't like that they're aligned with the rest of the buttons. You know what I mean? I don't like to have to reach across A and B buttons to get to the control stick. It should be more congruent. I don't know.
It's weird too because actually that's kind of not that because remember the Wii U controller, had that, where I had the sticks like in the center kind of, and it was like, but like not like the PlayStation where they were like down, it's like it was kind of like in line. It was very
in center,
off-putting. I didn't like it at all.
I guess I don't really remember the Wii U era that much because I don't remember.
Dark times.
I think I played Pokken Tournament once on it. I don't remember anything else.
You're better off.
Yeah. But yeah, I just think about like that D-pad controller and the fidget spinner controller are like when you're watching a sitcom and they're like, it's the Game Sphere. Like they're making up some fake ass hardware shit so that they're like not copyright infringing like in the show's dialogue, like they're not directly referencing. They make up a thing that it looks fucking stupid, but it's like that's what those Wiimotes remind me of.
The Nintendo Cross.
Nintendo Cross.
The power of Nintendo compels you.
Oh yeah, man! I just bought a new the joysticks on my Nintendo Crucifix just completely shit the bed, so I went and bought. I had to go buy. It just makes like the Wii gamepad is ugly and goofy, but like the Wiimotes are, I guess, also ugly and goofy, but like so clownable. Like no one would take that seriously, and then it's really bunk if you like completely botched that aspect of the hardware.
Yeah. I mean, the Wii is like, it's nothing without that design, right?
Yeah.
Like that was so core to what it was, and yeah, like we said, that's also true for the DS. But I think there's a universe where that version of it is just, it's a Game Boy that folds in half, and it's like, okay, like that would have, obviously that wouldn't have been what the DS was. It might not have been as successful. It might have not, had success with stuff like Brain Age and Sudoku and like all these other things that helped evangelize casual gaming. But I mean, if the worst case scenario is that it was like the Game Boy 3, it's like that there's a version of that's okay probably, Yeah. Whereas
exactly.
I think you're right that with the Wii, it's you're really gambling on what the Trojan horse was for that device, like that was the thing that they marketed that more than the software, right? Was like this unique design, that was like what made it so revolutionary at the time. Yeah, no, you won me over. I think you're right. I think that's the worst one. I think that would definitely be the worst one.
Okay.
We got there. Well, folks, if you want to let us know what you think the best or worst designs were here, or like if there were one of these that you could see a version of it coming to market, like we talked about with that one-handed micro, I'd love to hear from you folks in the comments and all the ways you can get in touch. Of course, you can find all of them over at our website, flipscreen.games. You can write in, get your questions right on the air. You can go check out our sister shows, the Flipscreen Games podcast and the Steam Deck podcast. You can join our Discord and keep the conversation rolling between episodes. Find all the other places that we are all over the web. However you choose to get involved in the community or show your support, we thank you very much for joining us here on another episode of Nintendo Noise. For the crew, I've been Pete. She's been Sierra. We'll see you next week.